Hey guys, welcome to book review number 105. Today I'm going to be reviewing Midnight in Siberia by David Greene, subtitle A Journey into the Heart of Russia. Now, I had a lot of hope for this book. It certainly is a topic that's interesting to me. You know, I travel along the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It's by an author who went to Harvard. You would think of quite good pedigree, works on NPR's Morning Edition. Unfortunately, I found this book quite disappointing, primarily because the topics kind of introduced systematically throughout the book are very interesting, be it, you know, all the way down the line, from Moscow to Vladivostok. All the topics, all the people he meets, all the encounters he has, all the, you know, political repression, or just the whole variety of life he met along the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It's very interesting. But it seems like David Greene really had every single response to what he saw preordained, which was kind of a rail against Vladimir Putin, a kind of rail against the complexity of the Russian people. He talked about suffering, but unfortunately, you know, and the Russian people do suffer. And he talked about, you know, the joys of the Russian people, and he talked about how complex it was. Now, these are all great things, but it just appeared very obviously, once you started getting into the heart of the book, that all this stuff was preordained. Like, any time David encountered anybody, there were going to be about 5 to 7 responses that he was going to have, depending on the circumstance. Once again, maybe I'll try to make this review sort of repetitive to kind of reflect what I felt was the lack of really going in tabula rasa, of trying to observe and bring conclusions merely from the observations and not your own bias in. Now, well, the caveat to this should be said that most of the conclusions that David Greene drew were correct. That Vladimir Putin is terrible. That Russia is a mess economically. That there was sort of a flirtation with democracy in the early 1990s, but has since regressed. But he would do things like go see a family who had police brutality. Had a situation with police brutality. And then, rather than kind of talk about, he would talk maybe for a few paragraphs about the police brutality in the event, but then would immediately transition into, well, under a democratic state, this wouldn't happen. Now, that's very true, but nobody brought up democracy. Like, there was no sort of prompt for a lot of kind of just ham-fisted responses that he had. And once again, it's hard to unless you really have an observant eye, it's hard to pick up on this, because it's not like what he's saying, again, it's not like what he's saying is wrong. For example, he goes and sees a plane crash that might or might not have been a conspiracy, to kind of like a 9/11 conspiracy, but may have happened, to sort of rally the nation and have the nation become more nationalistic right before a national election. Now, this may happen, but he goes to the person's house. This was a hockey team that died in this plane crash. He goes to the parents' house of this hockey player. They have all this memorabilia on the wall, and it's a very personal moment. And rather than, in the course of asking questions, kind of transition to the larger politics, he goes from 0 to 100 immediately. Very, very sort of, these people are very nice people. Their son was very good. A very good son. He loved hockey, all this stuff. What about Putin? You know? And if that came up naturally, I feel like David Greene would have had a better, this book would have been better. But it's often not. And again, I know I'm being repetitive, but this is really sort of what the book does. Maybe I'm kind of reflecting the nature of this book. Now, I will say kind of a couple things. He is a pretty good observer. Like, he saw how a lot of people in Moscow would just completely unacknowledge pain or suffering on the street. You know, say like in New York City, people may not acknowledge one another on a day-to-day basis, and even something like the impoverished they might not acknowledge. But if there's going to be like if somebody gets hit by a bus or a car and is in major medical emergency, they're going to talk to them. But David observed that people in Moscow tend to be very cold, which I felt like was more a true observation of his, not just sort of like something pre-planned. What else was there? Well, I'm going to go to the map because really I sort of made my main criticism of the book, but the thing that's really sad is how many interesting stories there were in here. You know, he talks about kind of a little bit of the history of the Decembrists and then moving into Siberia. If you didn't get it, this is obviously a book about Siberia, though about half the book takes place, maybe like a third of the book takes place in European Russia. What else? If it's Tyamund, he goes to, he sees these singers in the forest that won like the Eurovision competition, which is like a classic non-political type thing. Now, there were some political ends to it, but these babushkas, these singers, these elderly, a lot of them, I think all of them actually, widowed singers, finished second in a Eurovision competition and became kind of a pop phenomenon, not only in Russia, but in Europe. And there's certainly politics behind what they do. You know, many of their husbands died under circumstances that, if not directly caused by the Russian government, it certainly helped lead to their decline via, you know, like alcoholism or some sort of earlier type thing that happened that led to a lower quality of life and they died young. That kind of stuff. But David, rather than kind of let them tell the story, forces that story upon them. Now that story is there, that story is true, but there's just no sort of letting the characters in the book, and these are true people, which makes it even more sad. The characters in the book have room to tell their own story. The story is always the story that he wants to tell. Let's see, what else does he go on? He visits it's hard when you visit a pro-democracy person to not have it be a little bit didactic and go for like, you know, the big political moment. He visits a pro-democracy group that happened in this little tiny, or it's really not like a pro-democracy, but almost anti-authority or anti-police state in the middle of the forest. And how sad Russia is that in this little tiny town that stood up to kind of very banal approaching authority in a minor violation of human rights, or, you know, just stuff that wouldn't fly in the West. They stand up, and because they get publicity from a cousin of a cousin is influential in a media organization that has some degree of independence within Russia, one of the few that does. Their story got on the air, and they were able to go to court and win a court battle against the police in the state. The problem being is that this is a little tiny town in the middle of nowhere, and is a drop in the bucket compared to the human violations that go on across Russia. Let's see, what else? He visits Irkutsk, Ula-Unde. I should also say another thing, like another criticism that I have. It's like just because there's like a situation that does not have an easy conclusion, you saying that the Russian people are complex does not make your book a very good analytical book. Like, that's me just like approaching a problem, like a math problem that I don't get, or has like things that I need to delve further into, and just saying, well, this is a really complex problem, and that being the solution to the problem. And David does that quite a bit in the book. The Russian soul is so complex. And you know, something that really pissed me off in the early part of the book, this is the irony of all ironies. He says, the Russian soul is very complex, it's hard to understand, nobody knows why Russian people do what they do. And then for the next 5 pages, he gives the history of the early Rus in the 900s and extrapolates century by century into exactly what the Russian soul is today. Exactly what it is. Like, you can't say that it's complex and you don't get it, and then take these huge kind of ham-fisted approaches to the book. It doesn't work. Yeah. Kind of with his translator, he eats a lot of the local food. Talks about how generous the Russian spirit is, which he counts genuinely, but also kind of fills that void in. And in general, I'd say I really hate to draw this conclusion, but I've just read some other books on Russia that people that are really old hands in Russia, that have lived in Russia for 15, 20 years, have done extensive research in Russia. David Greene does not speak Russian, or if he does, it's minimalistic. He has to have a translator for most of the book. The reason he's in Russia is NPR put them there as a foreign correspondent. He only lived there for a couple of years compared to some of these other authors that lived there an extended period of time. And I really hate to say this, I think the reason that the book comes across as so didactic is because David Greene just really doesn't have the long-term chops to be able to truly analyze what's going on in Russia. You know, I read something like Lost and Found in Russia, where she took a 20-year, I forget the author's name, but she took a 20-year, going back and forth in Russia, spending extensive times with families. I look at something like Travels in Siberia, which made extensive trips through Russia, as well as just being an academic Russophile in general. And they were just much deeper, more bedrock books when it came to what Russia was. So I hate to have this be such a negative review. As I said, I mentioned a few of them. The introductions to a lot of these characters are great. They're interesting characters, they have unique stories, they have stories that need to be told, but David Greene just really does not have the chops to fill in their story in a way that's a full portrait and not just that's a perfect way of putting it. A full portrait and not just a character of what the Russian soul is. So anyway, Midnight in Siberia by David Greene. Check him out, I guess. This wouldn't be my first recommended book on Siberia, but I will say he does have a very positive, not positive outlook on the Russian people, but he generally seems to be engaged. That's just opposite of what I just said. Very positive juju, positive vibes. I don't know. That is completely unacademic, but he does try to. I don't know. Just read the book if you want to, or read another book on Russia. All right, check out my next reviews, you guys.